Time doesn't solve everything. Some crimes stay buried, quiet, cold, untouched. We bring those stories back into the light. Each case on this channel remains a mystery. No endings, no peace, just lingering shadows and unanswered calls. These are the real cold cases, raw, unresolved, and still waiting. On June 23, 1965, Houston police officers Captain Charles Bullock and L.M. Bart arrived at 1815 Driscoll Street to perform what they expected would be a simple welfare check. The request had come from Marvin Martin, nephew of Fred and Edwina Rogers, who had grown worried after several days without contact. Fred, 81, and Edwina, 79, were elderly and usually in touch, so their sudden silence raised alarm. The Rogers home was located in the Montrose neighborhood, an area where appearances of calm and normalcy often masked hidden tensions. Fred and Edwina lived there with their son, Charles Rogers, a reclusive figure who was largely unknown to neighbors. He left the house early, returned late, and rarely spoke to anyone, even his parents. Many locals were not even aware that he still lived inside the home. When the officers reached the back entrance, they noticed something immediately out of place. Several heavy flower pots had been stacked against the back door, preventing it from opening. After finding another way inside, they entered a house that appeared strangely undisturbed. The rooms were neat, and at first glance there were no signs of struggle. It seemed as though the elderly couple had simply stepped out, but the atmosphere carried an odd stillness. While Barta moved upstairs, Bullock walked into the kitchen. Their refrigerator caught his attention. Opening it, he believed at first that it was packed tightly with butchered hog meat. The sight was peculiar. Why would an elderly couple store so much meat if they were away? As he looked closer, a chilling detail emerged. Inside the vegetable drawer rested the severed head of a woman. Shocked, he opened another bin, where a man's head was placed. Bullock quickly shut the door, then reopened it, confirming the gruesome discovery. Backup was immediately called, and investigators soon realized the refrigerator contained carefully dismembered remains of Fred and Edwina Rogers, marking the beginning of one of Houston's most infamous unsolved crimes. The autopsies performed on Fred and Edwina Rogers revealed the shocking extent of the violence that had taken place inside their Montrose home. Investigators determined that the murders had occurred on Father's Day, June 20th, 1965, 3 days before police made their grim discovery. The precision and brutality displayed in the killings painted a disturbing portrait of what had happened. Edwina, 79, was executed with a single gunshot wound to the head. The shot was described as quick, deliberate, and efficient, suggesting that her death was carried out with a calculated level of control. In stark contrast, Fred, 81, suffered a far more violent fate. He had been struck repeatedly with a claw hammer, his skull crushed under the force of the blows. Adding to the horror, Fred's eyes had been gouged out and his genitals removed. These details indicated a level of rage or resentment directed specifically at him, highlighting a stark difference between the ways the two victims were killed. After their deaths, both bodies were subjected to a methodical and chilling process. The victims were meticulously drained of blood, dismembered into smaller pieces, and thoroughly washed. The remains were then packed carefully into the household refrigerator. The medical examiner observed that the dismemberment was executed with a surprising degree of neatness, suggesting the killer possessed either anatomical knowledge or significant experience with tools. Inside the home, investigators found little in the way of forensic evidence. The residence had been thoroughly cleaned, further demonstrating premeditation. However, blood traces in the bathroom pointed to it being the primary site where the dismemberment took place. The careful effort to sanitize the scene, combined with precise handling of the remains, revealed a perpetrator who was both deliberate and practiced in concealing their crime. Charles Frederick Rogers, the 43-year-old son of Fred and Edwina, quickly became the focus of investigators following the discovery of his parents' remains. Despite living in the same house, Charles was almost invisible to neighbors and even to extended family. His daily routines and guarded lifestyle made him an enigmatic figure, one who seemed detached from the world around him. Neighbors reported that Charles left the home before sunrise and returned well after dark. These comings and goings were so consistent that few in the Montrose neighborhood even realized he resided in the Rogers household. Unlike most adult children living with elderly parents, Charles rarely interacted with Fred and Edwina in any conventional sense. Instead, he communicated by slipping handwritten notes under the locked door of his attic bedroom. This unusual method of contact emphasizes extreme isolation within the home and raised questions about the nature of his relationship with his parents. Investigators uncovered details of Charles's professional background that added complexity to his portrait. He had once worked as a geophysicist for a Shell oil company, applying scientific expertise in the oil industry. Earlier in life, he served as a pilot during World War II, which provided him with valuable technical and survival skills. Despite this accomplished history, by 1965 Charles appeared unemployed, socially withdrawn, and increasingly disconnected from society. This combination of professional ability, disciplined habits, and personal isolation contributed to the mystery surrounding him. His background suggested a man capable of precision and planning, yet his reclusiveness made him difficult to understand. After the murders, these same traits fueled widespread speculation and helped direct suspicion toward him. Charles Rogers' peculiar way of life, defined by secrecy and detachment, became central to the investigation and later to the theories that attempted to explain what happened inside 1815 Driscoll Street. As investigators combed through the Rogers residence, attention inevitably turned toward Charles, the couple's reclusive son. From the very beginning, he stood out as the only logical suspect, and the evidence discovered inside the home seemed to support that conclusion. One of the most telling discoveries was a smear of blood on the keyhole of Charles's locked attic bedroom door. Detectives speculated this trace suggested either an attempt to enter his private quarters or an effort to wipe away incriminating evidence. More disturbing was what investigators uncovered inside the room itself. Among Charles's belongings lay a blood-stained handsaw, later suspected to have been used in the dismemberment of Fred and Edwina's bodies. Its presence directly tied his personal space to the gruesome crime scene. Equally important was what investigators did not find. There were no signs of forced entry anywhere in the house, eliminating the possibility of an outsider sneaking in unnoticed. Whoever committed the murders had intimate access to the residence, a fact that further narrowed suspicion to Charles. By the morning after discovery, Charles was already missing. He had vanished without contacting relatives, friends, or co-workers. Authorities immediately identified him as a prime and only suspect, launching a nationwide manhunt that extended to airfields across the country. His history as a pilot raised fears he might attempt to flee by plane, but no such records were ever uncovered. The search for Charles produced little more than dead ends. He left behind no financial activity, no correspondence, and no traceable movements. This sudden disappearance only deepened the chilling mystery surrounding the case. The combination of forensic evidence, circumstantial links, and his flight from justice made him the unavoidable focus of the investigation. For police and the public alike, Charles Rogers became the central figure in what would forever be remembered as the Icebox murders. Following the shocking discovery of Fred and Edwina Rogers' remains, law enforcement launched an intensive manhunt for their son, Charles Rogers. Given his background as a World War II pilot, investigators feared he might attempt to flee by air. Local and regional airfields were checked, passenger lists were reviewed, and flight logs were scrutinized, yet no evidence surfaced that Charles had left Houston by plane. The investigation quickly widened. National bulletins circulated his description, and newspapers across the country carried headlines about the Icebox murders. Despite the widespread coverage, not a single credible sighting was reported in the immediate aftermath. This absence of leads was striking, considering the brutality of the crime and the public attention it generated. Charles's notoriously reclusive habits only deepened the challenge for investigators. With virtually no friends, no recent co-workers, and little family contact, there were few avenues to explore. Over the years, rumors spread that Charles had been spotted in Mexico, Central America, and even as far away as Canada. Some claimed he was living under an assumed identity, others that he had been killed shortly after fleeing. Yet every alleged sighting dissolved under scrutiny, leaving detectives with nothing solid to pursue. By 1975, a full decade had passed without any verifiable trace of Charles Rogers. At that point, a local judge declared him legally dead in absentia, a step that allowed the courts to resolve financial and property matters tied to the Rogers estate. Still, the declaration did little to quiet speculation. Was Charles truly dead, or had he successfully vanished into another life, protected by his intelligence and wartime training? The unanswered questions surrounding his disappearance ensured that the mystery of Charles Rogers lived on, transforming the icebox murders from a gruesome homicide case into one of Houston's most enduring legends. In the decades that followed the murders of Fred and Edwina Rogers, the absence of clear answers created fertile ground for speculation. Without a definitive conclusion about Charles Rogers' fate, conspiracy theories began to surface, ranging from the wildly sensational to the cautiously plausible. One of the most extraordinary theories was introduced in the 1992 book The Man on the Grassy Knoll. Its authors alleged that Charles Rogers had been more than just a reclusive geophysicist. According to their claims, he was a covert CIA operative who played a role in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. The theory suggested that Fred and Edwina stumbled upon their son's intelligence activities and, in order to protect state secrets, Charles silenced them permanently. This idea, though lacking substantive evidence, quickly caught the attention of Kennedy assassination conspiracy enthusiasts. For those already suspicious of government cover-ups, the icebox murders became another thread in the tangled web of JFK lore. Mainstream investigators, however, dismissed the claims as speculative fiction rather than factual history. A more grounded theory emerged in 2003 with the publication of the Icebox Murders by Hugh and Martha Gardenia. Their research painted a deeply troubled family dynamic at the Rogers household. According to their findings, Charles had endured years of emotional and physical abuse at the hands of his parents, particularly from Fred. They also alleged that Charles had been financially exploited, with his parents forging documents to access and misuse his money. The Gardenias proposed that the murders were not the act of a government assassin, but rather the culmination of decades of resentment, abuse, and betrayal. In their account, Charles killed his parents in an explosion of repressed anger, then relied on contacts from his oil industry career to arrange his escape to Central America. They argued that he lived in obscurity, there before dying years later. These competing narratives, one sensational, the other rooted in family dysfunction, illustrate how speculation kept the Icebox murders alive long after official investigations had stalled. Whether viewed as a Cold War spy thriller or a tragic story of domestic abuse, the case refused to fade into obscurity. Each theory, regardless of its credibility, added new layers to the mystery of Charles Rogers and ensured that the crime remained a subject of fascination for true crime enthusiasts, conspiracy theorists, and historians alike. The Icebox murders remain etched in Houston's history as one of its most haunting and perplexing crimes. Nearly 6 decades later, the case continues to command public attention, not only for its shocking brutality, but also for the enduring mystery of Charles Rogers' disappearance. The combination of gruesome detail and unresolved questions has kept the story alive in the public imagination far longer than many other homicide cases of the era. Forensic investigators, journalists, and authors have revisited the murders repeatedly, hoping to uncover new information or offer fresh interpretations. Books, articles, and documentaries have explored the killings, each attempting to shed light on motives or possible outcomes. Yet despite the passage of time and advances in investigative techniques, no new evidence has surfaced to definitively close the case. Charles Rogers remains both the prime suspect and an enduring enigma. His complete vanishing act ensured that speculation, rather than resolution, defined the narrative. The legacy of the case lies not only in its gruesome details, but also in what it revealed about the limitations of mid-20th century forensic investigation. In 1965, investigators lacked the modern DNA tools and digital tracking methods available today. The absence of such resources made it easier for a suspect like Rogers to disappear without leaving a trace. Today, the Icebox murders stand as a chilling reminder that some crimes resist explanation. The combination of savagery, mystery, and vanishing suspect ensures its place in the annals of true crime history. It symbolizes both the horror of familial violence and the cultural fascination with unsolved cases that continue to intrigue and disturb audiences. Our next cold case is about Ronley Ratliff, 24 years old girl who was found in a burning home. On the morning of April 15th, 2004, 24-year-old Ronley Ratliff was found dead inside her mother's home, located just south of Mooresville, Indiana, on Dayhuff Road. Her body was discovered lying next to the sofa. The scene was marked not only by her sudden death, but also by the presence of fire. Flames had spread through part of the residence, leaving investigators to determine whether they were an accident or something more deliberate. Authorities quickly ruled that the fire had been intentionally set. The blaze was classified as arson, with investigators stating it appeared designed to conceal the crime. This conclusion carried heavy weight, for it shifted the case from an unexplained tragedy into a confirmed homicide investigation. Officials did not disclose the exact manner of Ronley's death, but their findings left no doubt that she had been murdered. For the family, the news arrived with devastating bluntness. When Ronley's Aunt Kimberly received the call, she initially asked where her niece had gone. The response was chilling in its finality. "No, she's gone. She's dead." That statement captured the shock of a moment that forever altered the family's lives. The discovery presented investigators with a dual challenge. They faced the delicate work of processing a fire-damaged scene, while also preserving what evidence remained of a violent crime. Local reports emphasized that the fire was limited in scope, but deliberately set, a defining element in what has since remained one of Morgan County's most haunting unsolved. Ronley Ratliff's name carried a story before her life even began. It was created by joining her father's name, Ronald, with the name of his best friend, Warren Lee, who had tragically died in a car accident. In that way, her name became both a remembrance and a promise, carrying forward two men deeply significant to her family. At the time of her death, Ronley was 24 years old. Within her family, she held a role that was truly special. She was the first daughter, the first niece, and the first grandchild. Each of those firsts marked her as a child who brought new joy and meaning into her relatives' lives. Those milestones gave her a unique place in the family's history, one that everyone remembered when reflecting on her. Ronley grew up in Mooresville, Indiana, where she was surrounded by family ties that remained close throughout her life. Among the strongest of those bonds was with her aunt, Kimberly, also known as Kim Sink. Kimberly is often the voice remembering Ronley in public accounts, and her recollections consistently describe a young woman worth protecting. Family members describe Ronley as one of those special kind of people that you just want to protect. To them, she was not only a daughter or a niece, but someone who radiated kindness and sweetness. Her name, her role as the family's first, and her upbringing in Mooresville continue to find the way her loved ones remember her Toda. Ronley Ratliff's early years were not easy. Family members have shared that she faced difficulties in childhood, which required her to mature more quickly than most. Despite those challenges, she developed a quiet resilience that shaped how others remembered her. Descriptions from her relatives present a young woman who was both sensitive and strong, someone who carried her hardships with grace while still showing warmth to those around her. Her Aunt Kimberly recalls that Ronley could be shy when first meeting people, but once she felt comfortable, her caring nature shone through. She was very sensitive and always wanted nothing but the best for others. Those qualities defined how her family saw her as a daughter, niece, and granddaughter who consistently sought kindness and security in her relationships. Music also played a role in her identity. She loved gospel music and admired the work of John Mellencamp. One especially treasured memory involved a CD of songs she made for her father, which he would play often, keeping her close even through sound. Family anecdotes provide glimpses into Ronley's personality. Camping trips, working on school science projects, helping with prom preparations, and sharing the ordinary but meaningful acts of home life. These stories illustrate her closeness with her aunt and her devotion to family connections. Looking back, Kimberly has acknowledged that there were aspects of Ronley's adult life that parents and relatives may not have fully known. Yet the image that remains is of a young woman both gentle and brave. On April 15th, 2004, Ronley Ratliff made the decision to spend time at her mother's home, a residence situated just south of Mooresville. Relatives later explained that she had gone there intending to have time for herself, a quiet choice that placed her within the house on that Thursday morning. The calm of that decision was broken by devastating news. At some point that morning, an urgent call was placed to her aunt, Kimberly. The words were abrupt and final. Ronley was gone. When Kimberly pressed for clarity, the message was unmistakable. She was told directly that Ronley was dead. Those few words carried the unbearable weight of certainty, and they marked the beginning of the family's shock. Inside the house, Ronley's body was discovered beside a sofa. That image became fixed in both the investigators' reports and the family's memories. What unfolded next was a rapid notification of relatives, each one confronted with a sudden, irreversible loss. The circumstances of her death, compounded by the fire that had spread within the home, gave the discovery a haunting permanence. In the weeks following, mourning extended beyond the family. A vigil was established at White Lick Cemetery, close to the anniversary of her death. Each year, the ceremony has been repeated, turning the immediate aftermath of April 2004 into a continuing act of remembrance. The sequence of that day, the visit, the discovery, the call, and the collective grief, remains sharply defined in the community's memory. The fire that consumed part of the Day Off Road home was quickly ruled an act of arson. Investigators determined that the blaze had not caused Ronley Ratliff's death, but had been deliberately set in an effort to conceal the homicide. From the very beginning, this conclusion shaped the course of the investigation. The ruling made clear that authorities were not dealing with an accident, but with violent crime and an intentional cover-up. The arson also created serious obstacles. Flames and smoke destroyed or damaged material that could have yielded answers, while the deliberate ignition complicated the recovery of physical traces. Investigators were forced to approach the case through what survived the blaze rather than what might have been lost to it. Over time, the Morgan County Sheriff's Office maintained focus on Ronley's case. A cold case squad of 6 members was assigned to re-examine files, revisit witnesses, and pursue forensic opportunities. Public reports highlight that authorities work with DNA evidence, aiming to refine and expand profiles that might connect to a perpetrator. Efforts included outreach to outside laboratories and a pursuit of funding to support advanced testing. The combination of arson damage and the passage of years created dual challenges: degradation of samples and fading of memories. Yet the official record shows sustained work by investigators determined to push the case forward. The central investigative facts remain unchanged: a homicide, an arson set to cover it, and evidence both limited and preserved for ongoing examination. Local reporting confirms that Ronley Ratliff's case remained an active priority for the Morgan County Sheriff's Office long after 2004. The department organized a cold case squad, which continued to review evidence, revisit witnesses, and develop new forensic avenues. Authorities stated publicly that homicide cases never close until there is legal resolution, reinforcing their commitment to sustained investigation. Central to the squad's work was the pursuit of DNA evidence. Officials indicated that they had already developed some DNA samples connected to the case and were actively seeking advanced testing. Reports described how investigators planned a conference call with an independent laboratory to explore options for enhancing and refining DNA profiles. This step reflected both the limits of local resources and the potential of modern technology to generate breakthroughs even in older cases. Funding represented another challenge. Law enforcement made clear that specialized DNA testing required financial support beyond regular budgets. As a result, investigators worked to secure funding that would allow outside laboratories to analyze preserved material. The emphasis on DNA showed how the team combined traditional casework with cutting-edge forensic science. Alongside laboratory efforts, the cold case squad also conducted re-interviews with individuals previously connected to the investigation. Reports mentioned discussions about possible grand jury action, underscoring the seriousness with which authorities approach developments. Each of these steps, reviewing evidence, interviewing key figures, pursuing DNA profiles, and exploring prosecutorial channels, demonstrate a deliberate effort to keep Ronley's case moving forward despite the obstacles of time. The loss of Ronley Ratliff left her family devastated, and their voices remain central to the public understanding of her case. Her aunt, Kimberly Sink, has spoken most often about the impact of Ronley's death. In interviews, Kimberly described a grief so deep that she felt, "My heart died. There's a piece of me that will never mend." Those words capture both the permanence of the loss and the enduring pain carried across the years. Alongside grief came regret. Kimberly has reflected that she wishes she had been nosier in Ronley's adult life, believing that greater awareness might have changed circumstances. That regret does not erase the closeness they shared, but underscores the questions that often haunt families after violent loss. Ronley, remembered as sensitive, loving, and daddy's little girl, had always been someone relatives wanted to protect. The fact that harm reached her despite those intentions deepened the family's sense of sorrow. Out of that grief and regret grew a determined promise. Kimberly has repeatedly vowed that Ronley will have the justice and respect she deserves. She has urged neighbors and community members to continue speaking Ronley's name, stressing that silence only prolongs injustice. The family has also expressed frustration that public attention sometimes faded over time, and they have asked anyone with knowledge to come forward. For them, remembrance is not passive. It is an active commitment to honor Ronley's memory, to speak for her when she cannot, and pursue justice without end. Years after Ronley Ratliff's death, remembrance has remained an active part of her family's life. One of the most visible traditions is the annual vigil at White Lick Cemetery, held around the April date of her death. Relatives and supporters gather to honor her, reinforcing that Ronley's name is not forgotten. The cemetery itself, where her grave is carefully maintained, stands as a constant marker of both loss and love. Aunt Kimberly has taken on the central role of memory keeper and advocate. She manages a Facebook justice page dedicated to Ronley, ensuring that her story continues to reach both local residents and wider audiences. In addition, Kimberly distributes handwritten notes about Ronley on the back of photographs, offering personal reminders of who Ronley was and why her life mattered. Fresh flowers are regularly placed at the grave, a visible sign of devotion and a way to keep her presence alive. Local reporting has described Kimberly's determination to beat the silence of Mooresville. She has repeatedly appealed to community members, encouraging them to post flyers, display Ronley's name in their windows, and share information. While some businesses continue to display flyers, the family expressed disappointment that broader community engagement lessened over time. Through vigils, photographs, online advocacy, and public appeals, the family has worked to ensure that Ronley's story endures. These acts of remembrance serve both as memorials and as calls to action, urging neighbors to remember her and to assist investigators in seeking justice. Nearly 2 decades after the murder of Ronley Ratliff, the case remains officially unsolved. Both her family and law enforcement continue to call for public assistance, emphasizing that homicide investigations remain open until final legal resolution. The enduring uncertainty leaves key questions unresolved. Who killed Ronley? Why the crime occurred, and whether advances in DNA analysis or the courage of new witnesses will finally provide answers. Authorities have made clear that they welcome information from anyone who may know something, no matter how small. The Morgan County Sheriff's Office has been identified in local reporting as the lead contact, with detectives available to receive calls regarding the case. Crime Stoppers of Central Indiana also accepts tips, offering an avenue for individuals who may prefer to remain anonymous. In addition, coverage referenced the Indiana chapter of the International Association of Arson Investigators as another point of contact for assistance in fire-related evidence. Each of these documented channels exists for one purpose: to gather the piece of information that could move the case toward resolution. For the family, appeals go beyond procedure. Ronley's relatives, especially her Aunt Kimberly, have urged people to say her name, believing that continued public attention encourages potential witnesses to step forward. Their message is consistent. Silence helps no one, while even a small memory or observation might help investigators connect the remaining fragments of case. Justice, they stress, depends on remembrance and the willingness of ordinary people to speak.